This presentation discusses how Better Buying's tools and resources can support your company to carry out due diligence in your supply chain and comply with some of the human rights due diligence requirements coming on stream as part of existing and forthcoming legislation. Here's a short list of some of the existing and forthcoming human rights due diligence laws. You'll see that legislation is already in place in both the UK and Australia in the form of modern slavery acts, while laws on supply chain due diligence and transparency exist in France, Germany, Norway and California. Laws are also coming into force in the Netherlands and in Canada in relation to forced labour, while the EU will bring in a due diligence directive in 2024. This is all informed by UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights and OECD Due Diligence Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct. While the details of these various pieces of legislation may differ slightly depending on the regions they cover, they all have the same essential aim: for companies to carry out proactive due diligence in both their own operations and their supply chain, identifying, preventing and mitigating abuses where they occur. Companies that start preparing now, before these laws become mandatory, will find it much less onerous to meet the requirements of the new legislation. The link between poor purchasing practices on the part of global brands and retailers and factory-level non-compliances in supply chains has been known about for a long time. Better Buying has analysed all the available research on this link and confirmed a number of known impacts of poor buyer practices on suppliers and workers. The most known impacts were on working time, contracts and human resources and compensation. And we also found evidence of impacts on child labour, forced labour, freedom of association and discrimination. All abuses that companies are going to be required to proactively look out for in the supply chain under the new legislation. Better Buying supplier surveys collect data on 7 key purchasing practices categories which we know from our research have the greatest impact on suppliers' ability to operate sustainably while still turning a profit. Planning and forecasting, design and development, cost and cost negotiation, sourcing and order placement, payment and terms, management of the purchasing process, and win-win sustainable partnerships. Our fully integrated set of tools, which include supplier surveys, e-learning on responsible purchasing, and published guidance on human rights due diligence for companies, all underpinned by our 5 principles of responsible purchasing, provide a clear roadmap for companies looking to examine how their purchasing practices are impacting the suppliers they work with, and committed to improving how they engage with suppliers. So let's take a look at how each of our tools and resources in turn can support your company to carry out due diligence across your supply chain. First of all, the Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index. This is our long, detailed survey which provides you with detailed findings pointing to the specific purchasing practices that are problematic and tracking the improvements that you're making over time. It was initially developed for the apparel and footwear industry, but is now applicable to the broader consumer goods industries as well. Suppliers submit objective business data related to your purchasing practices. Subscribing buyers are provided with company reports and aggregated and anonymous findings. Next, the Better Buying Partnership Index, a shorter, high-level survey which identifies potential problem areas in your business relationships. You can obtain feedback at scale using subjective measures that holistically assess the quality of the partnership using a Net Promoter type scoring. It's a really useful starting point for future detailed investigation through the Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index. It can also be used across multiple industries and will take less than 5 minutes for your suppliers to complete. Our e-learning course, The 5 Principles of Responsible Purchasing. This course is suitable for everyone in your company. It explores each of the 5 principles in turn. You will learn how breaking the principles impacts on suppliers, workers, the environment, and your own company. And you will identify ways that you and your colleagues can work together to identify new processes that support better purchasing practices. The OECD has developed 6 steps companies need to take when conducting human rights due diligence. Companies need to embed responsible business into the policies and management systems they use. They need to identify actual and potential harms, both in their own businesses and across the supply chain. They need to cease, prevent, and mitigate harm across the business and in the supply chain. They need to track implementation and results. They need to communicate how impacts are being addressed, and they need to provide for or cooperate in remediation where appropriate. This chart looks at how our 2 surveys, the longer Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index and the shorter Better Buying Partnership Index, and our e-learning course on the 5 principles of responsible purchasing, can help your company comply with many of these steps. Our e-learning course helps you to embed responsible business conduct and awareness of the importance of good buyer practices across your whole company. And our surveys enable you to proactively identify any practices that have the potential to cause harm to suppliers or workers, or which may already be doing so, and to work in partnership with your suppliers to address those. Every company that subscribes to Better Buying receives both an annual score and a company report, with clear evidence of year-over-year progress, both overall and in relation to each of the individual purchasing practices we collect supplier data on. These scorecards and company reports enable you to track implementation and results year over year and provide tangible evidence that you are making improvements and that they are having an impact, invaluable not only in terms of the reporting requirements of the new legislation, but for achieving buy-in from C-suite and senior executives and ensuring that your company is an attractive proposition for investors. So what are the next steps? You can sign up for our e-learning course and train everyone in your company on responsible purchasing practices. You can subscribe to our Better Buying Purchasing Practices Index to obtain data on where you need to improve. You can also subscribe to our shorter survey, the Better Buying Partnership Index, to identify how much improvement you need to make. You can also, once a subscriber, access exclusive subscriber-only peer learning opportunities. So start improving your supply chain operations today. Please contact Leonie Abraham, our Vice President of Business Development, to find out how we can help your business conduct your human rights due diligence.